What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Draft Talk. And if you're watching this on YouTube, it's been a minute. Good to be back. Happy to have Owen Riese here, Assistant O-line coach with Wisconsin-Platteville, one of the members of the scouting department over at the Shrine Bowl. Owen, how you doing, man? It's been a minute.
Good, man. Yeah, we kind of missed out. Unfortunately, our paths didn't cross in Indy for the combine, but
yeah,
always good to talk draft, talk Packers, and coming off, we're still feeling pretty good. We set the record for most Shrine Bowl draft picks ever in a year.
Yeah.
So happy about that. Feel pretty good about Green Bay's draft as well. So all things
yeah.
Nice,
Well, let's promote the Shrine Bowl just right out the gate while we have it. Like, who's the guy, or if you have two guys, couple guys out of the Shrine Bowl that you're just really excited where they landed?
Super excited. A few also typically lend toward the offensive line, but Mason McCormick out of South Dakota State ended up to Pittsburgh in the 4th round. Like, come on, just one of the most athletic guards of all time per RAS. Played like 60 starts at South Dakota State. He played there for 6 years. Goes there with Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier in the same class. Like, you want to talk about Pittsburgh getting back to being the Steelers again, right?
Yeah,
like,
for real.
For that like late Roethlisberger run in the last few years, they've kind of been like pretend poser Pittsburgh. Like, they still wear the black and yellow, but they're not really like this. Like, no, like they're getting back to being like the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he was a big one. Detroit got Christian Mahogany in like the 6th round, which is a guy when Christian was a sophomore at BC and playing with Zion Johnson and all that group there. It was really impressive. Alec Lindstrom. He was like a sophomore playing with 4 seniors. And everyone's like, this guy's going to be the real deal. I don't think Christian was ever that level of athlete, but an absolute people mover in the run game.
Yeah.
And tore his ACL in 23, right? Or 22, excuse me. So came back this year and finished strong. I was really happy with where he went. I couldn't believe Malik Washington went as late as he did.
I know. I was floored.
And I get, like, he's not big and he's probably a slot only, but like led the country in catches, was part of a national championship 4x1 team in high school. Like, plays bigger than 5'8" for sure. And then probably the other one, honestly, like, not like the New York Jets had two. One, like, I think Jordan Travis, if he's like picking a perfect place to go, basically learn how to be Tyrod Taylor, right? Like, that's a good. I mean, like, realistically, that's a good spot. You're going to be in the quarterback room with A-Rod and Tyrod. Like, that's a lot of knowledge to be gleaned there for a guy who will probably never have the physical, like, elite level physical skills. And then Quantez Stiggers was a corner that ended up going to the Jets as well. I believe he was the last pick in the 5th round. Kind of a crazy story if you guys aren't familiar. Signed with Lane College, a Division II school in Tennessee out of high school. He's like the oldest of like 9 siblings. Went there fall of 2020, so no football. Dad passed away in like a car accident that fall, dropped out of school, ended up in the fan-controlled football league, had like 4 picks in a game, ends up going to the CFL, is the defensive rookie of the year in the CFL, and was really excited for him. But a weird thing, though, because even though he had played professional football already, he had to go through the draft because he never played college.
Yeah.
So kind of an odd situation there. But just a few of our guys. Like I said, we had 57 drafted. There are probably 10 to 15. I was very, very surprised did not end up getting picked realistically. But no, a great year for us. And obviously, the more picks for us is all good and well. But obviously, the more success our game has, the more money and more donations and exposure Shriners Children's Hospital gets, which is realistically the real reason that the game happens. And seeing those kids throughout the week and their interactions with the players is really cool. So that's kind of, like I said, happy the on-field football product is obviously my contribution to it. Mm-hmm. I'm happy that's doing well, but the better that does, the better we do overall for the hospital, which is the main point.
Trying to get that out there. If I wasn't buying a house this year, I would have been out there to see you guys. But next year,
we'll be in Frisco. We signed an extension. We're in Frisco for the next few years. Practice at the Star. It's an incredible facility. Super blessed to be there, and everything was awesome this year, and looking forward to it.
Well, obviously, just so happy for your guys' success. You guys are all really good dudes as well. So just can't wait to see what happens next year. Let's go ahead and pivot to the Packers draft. I imagine that's why a lot of people are here listening to this. Pretty surprised, honestly, by that first-round pick in Jordan Morgan. I was kind of wanting Graham Barton. And before we even just get into Morgan and that debate, I just wanted to ask you about your thoughts about the class as a whole.
Yeah, so I'm admittedly like I try to be a bit more, and I think you know this as well. Like I try to remove most of my fandom. Obviously, I cheer for the Packers and I want them to win, but like I'm trying to get into scouting, right? So I try to have a different lens. I try not to just be the just a pure fandom side of it. And I think the big lesson, we'll get to this will be an overarching thing, but like the draft itself, I thought was awesome. A couple picks here and there, or whatever. We'll talk about that, but. I think the big lesson is to like we can't get locked in on guys, right? Like I was even talking, I texted this name drop, but I was texting one of the Packers scouts a couple weeks before the draft, and I was like, yeah, like you guys are in a really good spot for. I remember I said like Tyler Nubin or Graham Barton, right? Like one of those. And he's like, don't get too. He's like, there are a lot of good football players. He's like, don't get too. Don't lock in on one guy. That's not how this works. And
I may have been guilty of that on draft night just a little bit, but
same
yeah.
thing. Obviously, Graham Barton goes one pick after the Packers.
Yeah,
so close, right? But you know, I've heard a lot of this. This will be a small soapbox and I'll be done. Listen to a lot of podcasts over the last few days, a lot of conversations about the consensus board that our friend Arif Hassan does, which I think is a valuable resource. But I think you're doing yourself a disservice and a bit of a fool's errand if you use that. And I understand it is consensus, but like when we refer to teams' decisions based off of the consensus board, because every NFL team has their own board. So like what the Packers may have, and then trying to refer to what 32 media members have, or however many are in the consensus board, it truly is like apples to oranges. So you can't get into that too much. Obviously, every team, whether they have guys off their board due to character or injuries or scheme fit or whatever the case may be. So all that to be said, realistically, like I feel like the Jordan Morgan pick probably like was fairly obvious, or like the possibility of him being the pick was fairly obvious, but a lot of us kind of got blinded just by either personal bias or preference or whatever the case may be, positional, right? So overall, like I'm a pretty big fan of the pick. I'm not going to sit here and like trumpet that he's going to be some Pro Bowl player or anything. You know, obviously that's so to be seen, but I mean, he's 6'6", 315, good athlete, played left tackle, you know, like above average pass pro, has the athleticism they're looking for in the run game. You know, like at that point you're like, well, like why? Yeah, like why not? You know, and so he checks all the boxes. He just wasn't the guy that maybe the Packers or I especially had zoned in on as maybe the guy. And so to his credit, Ross Uglum asked me, it was Jordan Morgan, Graham Barton, or can't remember who the third one was on another podcast. And I basically said like, Jordan Morgan was my highest graded offensive tackle in cross checks last summer. That wasn't Olu or, you know, Alt or whatever. Yeah. And in which those guys weren't seniors. So we didn't even look at him anyways. But I was like, I'll go with Barton because I scout the ACC and I feel most comfortable with him. Right. Like, so even my own personal like agenda basically. And so that's all that to be said. I like the Jordan Morgan pick. It probably makes a lot more sense than we realized at the time.
Yeah.
And like I said, like when you're picking late in the first round, you're taking guys you feel pretty good about that are doubles that you might be able to stretch into a triple if it hits the gap, right? So like if they were going to go offensive lineman, Jordan Morgan makes a ton of sense, and I really don't have anything bad to say about the pick.
Well, yeah. So since you're obviously the OL expert, you know, assistant O-line coach, you know, you do the scouting. Why don't we just go ahead and start with Morgan? We can talk about, and you know, a little more briefly the other Packers O-line picks. But what did you like about him on tape? What are some of your concerns? And then I got, you know, more of a positional question after that.
Yeah. So I think, right, if you think Green Bay Packers offensive lineman, right, typically they tend towards better athletes, which may seem more obvious, but we'll see the longer that Jordan Love's career goes on, but especially with Aaron Rodgers, right, the propensity to extend the play, the ability to freelance a bit. A lot of times the Packers have left their tackles on islands, and I think a lot of that has to do with the quarterback looking to escape, right? Like these bigger, I dare say, thicker, more monstrous sized tackles, right? Guys like Orlando Brown or Trent Brown or Daniel Falele or some of just the more recent examples of it. Like typically in pass pro, they're just going to underset everything, right? Or for those unfamiliar with the term, like they're going to just play inside out on everything because they've always got their like sheer size to fall back on as far as their simply put, like their frame and body mass creates a longer edge, right? And so the big issue with guys in space that are less athletic is that you give the defender two different options, right? But if you play, and as an offensive line coach that's coaching at the Division III level, so not coaching world-class athletes, we always try to, like, just as a general premise, right? Like, we do have some guys that are more athletic, but I was like, we always use the terminology like dictate the rush, right? Like, play inside out, underset everything, because then you take away one of their options from the jump, they have to play the other one. And then if they decide they want to come back to that original option, you've already kind of got it covered, or at the very least, you're in a better position to handle it. And that's where those bigger guys kind of play a specific way. Orlando Brown maybe is the only one that, and he's kind of done some stuff like on an island, but you need guys that can block with their feet, right? Like that's the biggest thing. And so the Packers have had guys like Bakhtiari, right, who is 3'10", right, and 6'4.5" and 3'10", or Brian Balaga at 6'5" and 3'11" or whatever he was, right? But like have the ability to block people with their feet out in space, as opposed to just using their size as a way to kind of give themselves a crutch on the inside and just kind of make everyone run around, right? So when you don't know where your quarterback's necessarily going to be like winding up from, having that ability to freelance and having that ability to kind of play off script as an offensive lineman is a huge deal, right? So that athleticism comes back to that in pass pro, and I think Morgan has that. I think especially well, like considering coming off the ACL at the end of 22, right? And you can tell, especially later in the year, like he started to really, really move really well again. And so I think whether he ends up inside or not with Green Bay, notwithstanding, I think that foundation as a pass protector, as an athlete, is a huge part of what attracted him to Green Bay to him. That being said, also in the run game, right? Just the ability of the Packers being a wide zone based team, that's their base bread and butter run play, right? So like the ability as a backside tackle to go maybe reach like a 20 tech backer that hasn't completely committed to scraping yet. Like that's a huge deal. And trying to get that defense going in one direction so the back can cut it back against the grain and kind of use that inertia against the defense. Morgan's very rarely going to be like that far behind guys, which is a huge deal, right? Like you want to be able to at least cover up or get to the back shoulder and allow that back the ability to make their blockers right. And so he's not the biggest like displacer. He's not going to absolutely maul people in the run game. He's not a slouch, right? I'm not going to say he's a finesse player by any means, but that's not his game, right? His game is on the move, be an athlete, and kind of play in space, play at the second level, get to linebackers, as opposed to truly just trying to dig dudes out and physically displace other human beings against their will. That's not his deal. Truthfully, that's not really the Packers' deal either.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so that I think makes a lot of sense. There are some things in pass pro. You can tell there was a couple times he got by Braylon Trice. Just some little things as far as continuing to improve as far as playing in space and different technical stuff. But as far as the foundation goes, from everything that they've said in press conferences, he's a great kid, really high floor as a human being, going to be a good fit in the locker room, fit in the O-line room, which can be an odd place to be completely fair, right? But like certain rooms, right? Like if a guy can't take a joke and that's kind of how the room is, like they might get chewed up and spit out pretty quick, right? So the personality fit's a huge deal there too, and it sounds like they're really comfortable with that. And then again, when you just pair the pure athleticism and basically being a dancing bear out there at 6'5", 315, and can really run around and move, it creates a high ceiling. And then when you consider that the kid's already been really good, that you feel better about that floor as well. As something to maybe juxtapose with like Amarius Mims, and not to knock on Mims. The guy has 8 career starts.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it's like if you consider all things equal, right? Like Amarius Mims is as much of a boomer bust player in this draft as there is. I feel like Jordan Morgan's a much more sure thing. And when you're picking late in the first round, right, that's a bigger deal than you'd think.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. My biggest question with Morgan, and maybe why I didn't have him ranked as high as some of these other guys, was his anchor. And I guess since you're the expert on this, strategy or this topic, with his anchor, are you more concerned about the technique? It feels like he's leaving his chest exposed maybe a little too often, or is it just that he needs to get stronger?
Being a 5-year college guy, like I would sure hope it's not the weight room thing. I mean, like there's a little bit of that. like you can continue to improve at the NFL level, but being in a Power 5 program for 4 to 5 years, I lend myself to believe that he'll be taught and coached to put himself in less positions to be bull rushed, right? Like one of the best ways to do that, right? And we're in the middle of spring practices right now here, and at the risk of sounding salty against D-line guys, right? Like the best way to stop a bull rush is to jump set him, and it's like I said, like in one-on-one pass rush, that's not what
Makes
they go
sense.
for. But like as far as like especially if you feel confident about your feet and your athleticism, right? Like if you can jump set someone and not immediately lose, you basically win, right? Because like if that's your biggest concern with Morgan is like, yeah, like he's just going to get bowled, then don't allow the defender to like build up momentum. Like don't let the
because that gives him less grounds to actually translate
100%.
Speed to power. Yeah.
And like the other thing too is when you jump set guys, right, and they're going to probably take it as a run block first.
Yep.
Right. So then they have to transition mid rep from I have to keep the edge to actually now I have to like transition into a pass rush move and stuff. So I'd be curious to see. I'm much more. It would be more concerning to me if it was a pure strength thing because I don't. Admittedly, like I haven't been in an NFL organization. I don't know how much true room for growth there is, like strength wise, with linemen. Like I'd be lying if I tried to give some really detailed answer. But like, I feel better about an NFL offensive line coach's ability to coach a guy to put himself in less positions to get bull rushed, as opposed to a sheer inability to handle it as a physical player.
Cool. Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst said that they're going to start him off at left tackle. See what happens there. Do you think that is where he ends up starting? And whether you do or don't, what do you think that the Packers 5 looks like on week 1?
I think long-term, that's probably where he ends up. And obviously some of that will have to do with how well Rasheed Walker plays and continues to do, what that competition looks like, what they end up doing with Zach Tom. Who knows what the final 5 will end up looking like. I still realistically feel like that was a bit of a lip service. I still can't. I feel like that's pretty rocking the boat to take your above average right tackle and simply just move them without necessarily and you just lost Yosh Nijman and the other tackles on the roster prior to Jordan Morgan are like Luke Tenuta, Kadeem Telfort, and Caleb Jones, which 1, 2 of those guys are Shrine Bowl guys. Shout out. But 2, like
Shrineman, baby.
Out of the 3 of those guys, like maybe 10 snaps in a game, right? So like, I still feel like Zach Tom will be the right tackle. That maybe whether that was a true threat to Josh Myers to pick it up, or if that was a legitimate, like, why not just see what we have here and we can try to move it around. But I would assume early on the starting 5 will likely be Walker, Jenkins, Myers, Ryan, and Tom, and then you see from there. Like I said, maybe Josh Myers really is struggling, and they move Tom to center, and they move Rasheed Walker to right tackle, or they move Jordan Morgan to right tackle, whatever the case is. However they want to try to finesse that. I think in the NFL you're doing yourself a misfortune if you're not putting your best 5 guys on the field, right? Like just simply, realistically, most of the weeks you're probably going to play a defensive line that's more talented than your offensive lineman. So like, if you're really not giving yourself the best chance to prevent those guys to get after your quarterback. But I don't know if it's the right thing to try to like force Morgan into the lineup just because he's at least from our lens, just because he's a 1st round pick, right? Like, and so I think at least initially, I think that's probably like, and for an offensive line, a position where continuity is so important. Obviously I'm not going to like not play good players because I don't want like Zach Tom to have a different double team continuity on combo blocks with Sean Ryan or Jordan Morgan. But like, unless Jordan Morgan comes in and is like overtly better, I think you'll continue to ease him in. And we've seen the Packers have been willing to do this. Maybe they rotate Walker and Morgan every 2 or 3 series or every 3rd series Jordan Morgan gets, just to get his feet wet a little bit and build that confidence and whatever the case may be. And the other thing too, and important to kind of remember, like the NFL injury rate's 100%, man. Like you're going to get hurt. You're going to get banged up. Whether or not you miss games, like you may start the game, but then play 3 series and you're like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
You need a dependable 6th, 7th, 8th guy. And so whether or not Jordan Morgan is truly a starter or not early, I think you're selling yourself short if you don't think that he's going to be dependent on at some point. And so the quicker you can acclimate him, the better. And if that's kind of giving him nibbles of playing time here and there, I think that's a good way to go about it.
I feel like the Packers do some unique stuff with their offensive line, and the way you're describing this, because we saw it with Bakhtiari last year, we saw it with that Runyon Ryan. It almost feels like they're treating it like an NBA rotation with minutes, except they're doing it with drives. And I'm curious to see if that's a trend that continues. I imagine neither of us are going to have the answers on that, but let's take a look at the other offensive linemen they picked, because we can just wrap up with that. Jacob Monk was probably the most interesting name, obviously the next earliest drafted offensive lineman. Center out of Duke, looks like he played guard and tackle, had a ton of starts. It's funny that, for all the Packers fans, including myself, clamoring for Graham Barton, they still get another athletic Duke offensive lineman. And from what we had talked about before recording, it sounds like you know a little bit about him.
Yeah, so Jacob Monk's a guy that just through prep of the Shrine Bowl, I was familiar with. I do the ACC for the game, and just going through some guys last spring, I was like, okay, like Jacob Monk has started 47 games. He's played center. He's played guard. And just watching the film, I was like, he's a better athlete than you'd think. I know, like, heading into this year, he had already been a captain last year, was coming back. And I had taken a bit of a special interest with Duke because I had a feeling like they might be kind of good, right? Like they were starting to build some momentum that first year under Mike Elko, and Riley Leonard's obviously at Notre Dame now, but I was like, they have a legit quarterback. Jalen Calhoun ended up going undrafted, but a receiver that's legit. And they had some of the defensive guys, Dwayne Carter, and a guy you'll hear about next year, Jalen Stinson's a nickel who's going to be really feisty. And so like, I knew they had the potential to kind of be decent, and took some extra time. And yeah, like Jacob Monk's a guy who primarily played right guard for them. And I admittedly, I knew who Jake Monk was. I would be lying if I told you that I expected him to get drafted. And that's not a knock against Jake Monk. It's just simply there's so many dudes, and typically, like, I mean, kind of surprisingly, like, wasn't really involved in the All-Star circuit and whatever else, but that's a credit to. And Mike Owen is the Packers Northeast scout. He has the North Carolina area along with, and they mentioned it. Multiple scouts were very adamant that they wanted Jacob Monk. But that goes back to the importance of those area scouts and Mike Owen doing his work. And Mike Owen's a guy who was really high on Dontavian Wicks as a junior, right? Like, and guys going back and like those trusted guys, and you get the character. He's a captain. He's going to be smart. He's at Duke, right? Like all that. Yeah. But then he's also a good athlete and just played a bunch of spots. And so like I said, I'd be lying if I told you that I was anticipating the Packers trading up in the 5th round to draft Jacob Monk. Mm-hmm. But I mean, realistically, and I'll say this as like a whole, as a draft class, like some of the guys you started to see go early in day 3, and like, this is going to sound like a knock on the draft class, and I don't really intend it to be, but this is going to be one of the thinnest draft classes in a while because of this upcoming year being the last year for all the incoming COVID kids, right? Like the fall of 2020 was when all of that extra year of eligibility started. And this upcoming year will be that big year, right? Where like everyone has the extra year. And so, this class was a bit thinner. And so when you get guys like I said, and this was one of the smaller classes, and we're like, okay, like this is really drafting undrafted free agents in the middle of the 5th on, which isn't bad. Like I'm not saying that there weren't guys that were drafted later than that or before that weren't good or whatever, but just the matter of the fact of like, we're going to like the variety of these picks is going to start to go now because we're really kind of like, it just, there isn't that major pool to pick from. And so Jacob Monk's a guy, and again, that's not a knock on Jacob Monk's, just simply wasn't a very thoroughly vetted prospect by the media. And so Monk's a guy, again, that tested well, intelligent, smart, high character guy. Is going to get fit in. And so obviously, like with the attention that Graham Barton got, right? Like you're going to go into Duke, and Duke's going to be like, yeah, like Graham's our guy, but you guys should really look at Jacob Monk too, right? And he checks the boxes for the pack. And one of those things, like, although he wasn't a guy that everyone was all in on, like once you get the full picture, you're like, this makes a lot of sense, right? Like there's no like, oh yeah, like this guy just wildly deviates from Packers tendencies. He doesn't. He really hits them all. He just wasn't like a super highly regarded guy. And so, and it's, again, in the 5th round, they talk about he's got the ability to play center and guard. He's a good athlete, creates competition in the room, improves the depth for a room that has lost right? Lost Yosh Nijman, lost John
Yeah.
Onion Sr., lost David Bakhtiari. And though those aren't all just guards or centers or tackles, but like you got to continue to build depth in the room. The second you allow that to become stagnant, you're falling behind, right? So Jacob Monk's a guy, again, like better athlete than you'd think, a little squattier. Will probably play center, probably really should play center in the NFL.
Okay.
But again, checks all the boxes and fits everything. And like I said, if you would have told me that Jacob Monk got drafted, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but that wasn't a knock on him. Just wasn't one of the higher rated guys. But again, like makes a lot of sense.
This is why we bring you on, Owen. Like, who else is actually providing in-depth analysis on Jacob Monk, the 5th-round guy out of Duke?
I don't know if that's the flex that you make it sound to be, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
No, yeah, I enjoy it. I get excited about the offensive linemen. I mean, I watch a crap ton sometimes. Archon and over APC really twist my arm to make sure I am. And I'll complain about it, but I'll always enjoy it once I start diving into it. Now, there is one other guy. I know it might be putting you on the spot. I have no idea if you've watched him. Travis Glover out of Georgia State. The only thing I can tell you about him is the one picture I saw from him before I started watching a little tape, which is barely any, is just like, holy crap, that's a large human, and it looks like he has freakishly long arms. Arm length measurement-wise was good. It obviously wasn't crazy, but he just looks like a large, long human.
He's a large man, yeah. So we watched – so Travis Glover was at the Hula Bowl, and part of our process, to be completely frank, is – at the Shrine Bowl, we usually end up picking quite a few Hula Bowl guys up, just because we'll get our initial round of invites out, and then whether guys get hurt or they choose to not participate or whatever the case may be, get picked to a different All-Star game, whatever. And so Travis Glover was a guy who was at the Hula Bowl, and we watched kind of in that interim period. Once the Hula Bowl put their roster out, honestly, like we'd be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't go and watch their guys and see who may be worthy, right? Whether it's an alternate guy or whether they just outright deserve a spot at the game, whatever the deal is. And so we watched Travis Glover. He was a guy that at Georgia State is a huge man at left tackle. I don't want to say I wasn't high on him because I think he would have fitted our game pretty well, and obviously went to the Senior Bowl and played really well. Like that's good. He was a guy I probably see him as like the least fit. I know he tested well, and obviously, like I will watch Travis Glover soon. I have not watched extensively.
Same.
To me, like he's a bit more of a gap type guy. I think he will play guard with Green Bay. I don't think he'll play tackle. I'll be curious to see, but yeah, he's a huge dude. Better athlete than you'd think, right? Like off the hoof, like that dude comes off the bus. I was like, oh, he's just going to be a plotter, mauler, and really can kind of move a little bit. Decent in pass pro. But he's a guy, that I think he'll end up slotting in at guard, and is really like on the big side of like the Packers like tendencies. Like he is about as big of a guy as they have drafted on the offensive line in a while. And so played left tackle at Georgia State. I assume he'll move inside. But again, just when you're that late, like that late in the round, right? Like that late in the draft.
Yeah.
Good athlete, big dude. Take a swing, right? And again, like, I don't want that to sound like that sounds very trivial and sounds very like oversimplified, but like adding quality depth to that room matters, right? Like maybe more than anything, because
100%,
especially now too, like in this era of like extended practice squads, there's more dudes that you're at risk of like getting poached at any given week, because and obviously other teams have more guys too, but like if some team loses 3 offensive linemen in a week, like I guarantee they don't have 3 linemen on the practice squad that they feel confident like to go like play major minutes. And the other thing too is like, well, like now we got to replace those 3 guys to replace the 3 guys, right? And so like continually having bodies at the position and churning them, putting them into your kind of development, right, for lack of a better term, like get them in the farm system, get them some at bats, like let them play, let them do stuff, and like Caleb Jones, Kadeem Telfort, Luke Tenuta, some of those guys have been there for quite a while, and they may find their time coming up here soon, or they may get out recruited, right? Like they may get like out compete, but that's just the nature of the beast a little bit. But you can't just say like, if you're the Packers, you're doing yourselves a disservice to just say like, well, we've been developing these guys for a couple of years, so we just feel good with the room. Like, no, that's not how it works, right? Like, because if they're as good as you think they are, they're going to beat out the guys that you bring in. And if they don't, well, then that sucks for them. But like, then the guys that you're bringing in are good then too, right? Like, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's just unfortunately a bit of the dark side of the business from a person standpoint. But yeah, so I mean, like, I will have more in-depth thoughts. This is terrible podcasting for your podcast.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I will have more in-depth thoughts on Travis Glover in the next couple of days. But again, it makes sense. Huge dude, decent athlete, tools galore, right? Like, perfect guy to take a bet on and swing on with one of your 8 day 3
a billion day 3 picks. I mean, listen, heard the name, saw one picture of him, and it's the 6th. Like, what's the pick? 202. Like, we're looking at the 202nd pick. You just show me a picture of the guy, and I was like, yep, cool. That works for me. That guy is huge. We'll see what happens.
Now, also, I don't want to jump the ship here. Also, 2 undrafted free agents that I feel pretty decent about have a chance to push for time too.
Is one of them Donovan Jennings?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me, can you tell me anything about him?
Donovan Jennings, what a great young man. Was at the Shrine Bowl. Honestly, one of the favorite kids we had down there. We were going to invite Donovan in 23. He broke his leg against Louisville.
Damn. Jeez.
And this year, if you want to go watch one, if you're like Owen, Tyler, I have a life, I have a family, why like just give me something to do. Like, I'm not going to go watch Donovan Jennings film. Watch South Florida against Alabama this year. One of the best films of any player against any team in this draft. Donovan Jennings shut down Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell, who just went in the 1st and 2nd round. I think he probably plays guard for Green Bay with full transparency. But he's a dude. He's a good pass protector. He's long. He's played a ton of football, right? And he fits all the Packers boxes. College left tackle, good athlete. And I think he's a guy that, again, in 2 to 3 years, he may be the Packers really got to add some competition to the room. They've been developing Donovan Jennings and Trente Jones for a while, but we got to keep churning through, right? Like, that's going to be the new thing. Trente Jones from Michigan, another guy that was at the Shrine Bowl, who they signed as an undrafted free agent, had 9 career starts at Michigan, but played in games in 5 different seasons at all 5 different spots along the offensive line. Really was Michigan's 6th guy. They had Carson Barnhart, who got signed by the Chargers, I believe. But he and Trente Jones were the 2 guys that, like, wherever you need us to play, we will find it, right? Like, you may have had a backup right tackle and Jones may be the backup left guard, but, like, he's going to play right tackle before the backup right tackle does, type of thing. And, like, those guys are tough to get rid of because they make everything, like, just a glue guy that can fit into any situation. Jones may play center, he may play guard, whatever the case is, but, like, he's a guy that I have a feeling is going to be peskier to get rid of than that people may like or may think.
Cool. I'd heard some good things about Jennings, but I'm glad you also brought up Trente Jones. Owen, appreciate you coming on, man. Like, this is the first episode back on the YouTube, so best person I can think of to talk offensive line. So if you are listening on the YouTube, also make sure you subscribe to Frozen Tundra Frequencies, wherever you listen to podcasts. And then if you're listening on FTF, you can check out the YouTube at Tyler D. Brooke, I believe. It's been a minute. It's been a long time since I've had this. But Owen, thanks so much for coming on, man. Good chat.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. And glad you guys are back up and running with Frozen Tundra Frequencies. It's good stuff. And obviously always want to see the Packers sphere doing well and healthy. And so I'm glad you guys are back up and running and excited to see what you guys have in store.
Awesome. Appreciate you, man. Well, we'll see you next week. If you're listening on the YouTube, I think we're steering a little bit. We have a Patriots guy on to talk about the Patriots draft. So see you next week. Go Pack Go.